He walked slowly down the wide street, his old shoes dragging slightly as if each step reminded him of all the places he had been and all the obstacles he had faced. The sun had already started to climb higher in the sky, but it did little to warm the chill he felt in his heart. People hurried past him in expensive coats and polished shoes, barely giving him a glance. They carried their briefcases, their shopping bags, their confident air, all things that seemed so far removed from his world. He adjusted the worn strap of his small, battered bag that contained all his few belongings. Inside, there was nothing but a few sheet music books, a tattered notebook with scribbled compositions, and a pencil chewed down to almost nothing. Yet, in his mind, he carried the music of his dreams. The building in front of him was tall and grand, with glass doors that reflected the bright sunlight. He paused for a moment to take it in. This was the place where some of the greatest musicians had once stood, the place where talent could be recognized, and perhaps life could change forever. But as he looked at the crowd gathered outside, a knot formed in his stomach. They all looked so polished, so confident. Their eyes scanned the room with subtle judgment and excitement. Some whispered in quiet tones to one another, smirking as they looked his way. He knew the whispers were about him. They were always about him. About his clothes, his shoes, the way his hair fell slightly messy over his forehead. About the bag that had seen better days. He straightened his back, reminding himself that he was not here to impress anyone with appearances. He was here for his music, and that was all that mattered. Yet, even as he tried to calm his mind, a shadow of doubt crept in. He had walked miles to reach this city, to reach this hall, and all he had was a dream and the skills he had spent years teaching himself. He had no famous teacher, no prestigious academy backing him, no elegant outfit to make him blend in with the crowd. All he had was himself and the piano waiting for him inside. The doors opened, and a soft hum of voices spilled out onto the street. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, letting the door close behind him. The warmth inside was comforting, but it did not ease the tension in his chest. The room was grander than he had imagined, with polished wooden floors that reflected the light from the chandeliers above. The walls were lined with portraits of musicians he had studied from old books, people whose names carried weight and respect. There was a piano in the corner of the room, a grand one, shining under the lights as if it had been waiting for him all these years. People turned to look at him as he entered. Their eyes scanned him from head to toe, taking in the worn-out jacket, the patched pants, the shoes that had clearly seen many seasons. Some raised eyebrows, others exchanged glances, as if they were silently questioning how someone like him could possibly belong here. A soft laugh escaped from a pair near the back, and he felt his cheeks flush. For a moment he considered turning around and walking away. But then he remembered the countless nights spent practicing on an old, out-of-tune piano, the late hours when the house was silent and the world asleep, the way his fingers had learned to speak the language of music even when no one was listening. He could not give up now. Not when he was so close. He moved toward the waiting area, a small corner of the hall with chairs neatly lined up. He took a seat, careful not to draw attention, though he knew it was impossible. Whispers floated around him like a cold breeze, some curious, some mocking. He could hear people asking who he was, why he was there, what he could possibly bring to the stage. He kept his eyes down, focusing instead on the pages of sheet music he had brought. His hands fidgeted slightly with the pencil, tracing the notes, imagining the sound, the rhythm, the emotion he wanted to pour into every key he would touch. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. One by one, candidates were called to the stage. Each one walked up with a confident stride, dressed in crisp suits and elegant dresses. They played with skill, some technically perfect, others full of emotion, all receiving nods of approval and murmurs of admiration from the judges and audience alike. He watched silently, absorbing not just their performances, but the energy of the room, the way the music filled the space, the way the audience responded. He noticed the subtle tension in the young pianist whose hands shook slightly, the pride in the eyes of the violinist who knew her piece by heart. He thought about his own journey. There had been no private tutors, no fancy lessons, no encouragement from anyone who had the means to help him. Every melody he knew, every note he played, had come from hours of practice, from learning by ear, from listening to recordings over and over again until he could replicate the sound, the emotion, the soul of the music. He remembered the nights when he had slept on a thin mat on the floor, waking up early to practice before heading to work, the small victories when he finally mastered a piece that had seemed impossible. Those nights had taught him patience, perseverance, and the kind of focus that could not be broken by whispers or judging eyes. Finally, it was his turn. A man approached, clipboard in hand, his expression one of polite curiosity tinged with skepticism. "Are you ready?" he asked. The young man nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He followed the man to the stage, each step echoing in the silent hall. He could feel every gaze upon him, the weight of their expectations, their doubts, their unspoken judgment. He took a deep breath, seated himself at the grand piano, and let his hands hover above the keys. For a moment he closed his eyes. He remembered the sound of the old piano back home, the way its keys had responded under his fingers, the way he had learned to coax emotion from its imperfect notes. He remembered the rhythm of the songs he had played, the pauses, the crescendos, the soft whispers of melody that had filled empty rooms and quiet nights. He opened his eyes and let the music flow. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but full of life. They echoed through the hall, cutting through the murmurs and whispers. The room seemed to shift, the energy changing with each chord, each subtle movement of his fingers. The audience, once judgmental, began to lean forward, drawn by the emotion that spilled from the piano. The music spoke of struggle, of dreams, of hope, of the quiet determination that had carried him this far. He played with a focus so intense that the world outside the hall disappeared. The polished floors, the chandeliers, the elegant audience. All of it faded into the background. All that existed was the music, the notes, and the story he was telling through every key. He could feel the eyes of the judges on him, their skepticism slowly giving way to awe. He could hear the soft intake of breath from the audience, the way they were caught off guard, unable to reconcile the talent before them with the humble figure sitting at the piano. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. Not for his clothes, not for his bag, not for the life that had been anything but easy, but for the music that had lived inside him all these years. He realized that this was the moment he had been preparing for, the chance to show that talent, passion, and perseverance mattered more than appearances or judgment. The music flowed naturally now, each note carrying the weight of his journey, each chord telling the story of the nights he had spent alone, learning, practicing, dreaming. When the last note faded, there was a silence so profound that it felt as if time itself had stopped. Then, slowly, the hall erupted in applause. Some clapped softly, some stood, some were too stunned to move. He looked up and saw expressions of disbelief, admiration, and a touch of shame on the faces of those who had judged him before he even touched the keys. He smiled faintly, a quiet, humble acknowledgement of the moment, and then stood, letting the applause wash over him. The man with the clipboard approached again, his skepticism replaced by awe. "That was extraordinary," he said simply. "We did not expect that." The young man nodded, grateful but not seeking praise. He knew that the music itself had spoken, that it had told a story more powerful than words ever could. As he left the stage, he walked past the audience, feeling their eyes follow him in a way they never had before. The whispers had stopped, replaced by admiration and curiosity. He carried himself with quiet dignity, not because he wanted recognition, but because he had finally shown that who he was on the outside did not define the genius he carried within. He walked out of the hall and into the sunlight, the day feeling warmer, the air lighter, and the world a little more open to the possibilities of someone who dared to dream, no matter how humble his appearance. That day marked the beginning of a journey, one where his talent could no longer be ignored, one where his music could speak louder than judgment, and one where the world would have to recognize him for who he truly was, a piano genius, waiting patiently for the right moment to shine. After his performance, he stepped down from the stage, the echoes of the final notes still lingering in the room. The applause had faded, but the memory of it stayed with him, warm and steady in his chest. He returned to his seat, feeling the weight of the curious and astonished eyes on him, some still whispering in disbelief. Their judgments, harsh and unkind just moments ago, were now replaced with quiet admiration or cautious respect. But he barely noticed them. His mind was still on the music, the rhythm of the piece he had just played, and the way it had felt to pour his entire being into each note. He sat quietly, letting the applause fade completely before the next candidate was called. Others went up, playing pieces that demanded precision and technical skill. Some were confident, some nervous, but none carried the raw, heartfelt emotion that had come so naturally from him. As he listened, he realized that the room had changed slightly. The air was lighter, more attentive. People leaned in to listen, and the casual murmurs had been replaced by focused silence. For the first time, he felt a strange sense of belonging. Not because he had won anyone over entirely, but because he had finally shown a glimpse of the truth about himself. A truth that no amount of judgment or appearance could hide. While waiting, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the first time he touched a piano, a small upright in a community hall that had seen years of use and neglect. His keys were uneven, some slightly sticking, some dull and worn. He had been no older than 10 and had only known the fascination of sound and rhythm. The first melodies he had played were clumsy and hesitant, but they carried the curiosity and wonder of a child discovering a new world. No one in his family had musical knowledge or resources, but they had supported him in the only way they could, by allowing him to dream, even if they didn't understand it. Those early lessons had been self-taught. He had borrowed books, listened to recordings, and spent hours mimicking the sounds he heard. There were times he felt frustrated, when the notes would not come together or his fingers refused to obey the vision in his mind. He often wondered if he was chasing a dream that would never lead anywhere. Yet, he kept going, driven by a passion stronger than doubt, fueled by a desire to express what words could not capture. Every hardship, every small victory, had built a foundation that now allowed him to play with the confidence he had displayed on stage. He thought about the people in the hall, those who had sneered at his appearance. He understood why they had judged him. They had no idea of the hours, the sacrifices, the struggles behind the battered clothes and worn shoes. If they had, perhaps they would have understood that talent does not wear a suit or shine in polished shoes. Talent lives in the heart, in the hands, and in the countless hours one devotes to perfecting it. And he had proof now that sometimes people needed to see more than the surface to recognize it. As the auditions continued, he noticed one young pianist struggling with nerves. Her hands shook slightly, her forehead glistened with sweat, and her notes stumbled in places. He remembered those feelings all too well, the fear of failure, the doubt creeping in at the wrong moment. He wished he could offer her encouragement, but he stayed silent, knowing that everyone had to face their own challenges. Still, he silently sent a thought her way. Stay with it. You can do more than you think. He understood that these moments were as much about inner strength as they were about talent. Finally, the auditions concluded, and the room shifted into a tense anticipation. The judges whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing toward the performers, their expressions a mix of surprise, admiration, and careful consideration. He felt his stomach tighten. This was the part he had feared most. The waiting, the uncertainty, the possibility that despite everything, someone could still overlook him. He reminded himself that he had already succeeded in a way. He had let his music speak, and it had been heard, even if recognition did not come immediately. The man with the clipboard, the same one who had guided him to the stage, approached quietly. "We'll be announcing the results soon," he said, his tone neutral but with a hint of curiosity. He nodded politely, choosing not to respond with words. Words had nothing to offer now. It was the silence, the anticipation, and the music that mattered. He tried to occupy his mind with small details. The way the sunlight fell across the floor, the subtle movements of the judges as they discussed, the soft hum of conversations that had returned among the audience. Yet, no matter what he focused on, a quiet tension remained in his chest. He looked around the room and noticed that people who had judged him earlier now kept glancing toward him with a new awareness. Their expressions were not entirely free of curiosity. They still wondered how someone so humbly dressed could possess the skill to rival the best. But for him, it was not about proving them wrong. It was about the moment he had experienced at the piano, the feeling of creating something beautiful from nothing, and the understanding that his efforts had not been in vain. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as he waited. Memories of his past journeys filled his mind. The nights when he had walked miles to reach a piano he could practice on. The days when he had saved coins to buy sheet music. The small victories of mastering a challenging piece without guidance. Each memory reminded him of his perseverance, and with it came a quiet pride. He had endured, and that endurance had shaped the person he was. A person who could now sit in a hall full of strangers and let his talent speak louder than any judgment or doubt. As the judges gathered their papers and whispered final assessments, he felt a subtle change in the room's energy. The audience seemed more attentive, the tension lighter, as if everyone had realized that appearances could not capture the truth of someone's skill. He noticed some young musicians exchanging glances, their faces reflecting surprise and a dawning respect. Even those who had doubted him from the start now appeared thoughtful, perhaps reconsidering how easily they had dismissed him before he even played. Finally, a voice rang out. "We would like to speak to a few candidates individually," the man with the clipboard announced. The room quieted, and eyes turned toward him. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be him? He stood slowly, his movements careful and measured, letting the anticipation build but refusing to let fear dominate. As he walked toward the front, whispers followed him, soft but persistent. Some were impressed, some confused, and some silently regretting their earlier judgments. He did not acknowledge them. His mind was focused, calm, and steady, entirely on the possibilities that lay ahead. When he reached the front, one of the judges, a woman with sharp eyes and a quiet authority, addressed him. "Your performance was remarkable," she said, choosing her words carefully. "We have rarely seen such emotion and technical skill combined, especially from someone with limited formal training. We would like to know more about you, your background, and your training." Her tone was professional, but the admiration was unmistakable. He nodded humbly, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. Finally, his story could be told beyond the music, and people would begin to understand the struggles that had shaped him. He began to speak softly about his journey, about the small community pianos where he had first learned, about the late nights and early mornings spent practicing, about the love for music that had kept him going despite every difficulty. As he spoke, the judges listened intently, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration. The audience, now leaning in closer, also listened, captivated not just by his words but by the sincerity and humility in his voice. Every story he told added depth to the music they had heard moments ago, and the person behind the music began to emerge, slowly but undeniably. After he finished, a pause filled the room. Then, one by one, the judges began to nod. The woman spoke again. "It is clear that your talent is genuine and exceptional. Your dedication and perseverance are equally impressive. We would like to offer you an opportunity to study here, under guidance, and to perform on larger stages." His heart leapt. The weight of years, the struggles, the doubts, all seemed to lift in that moment. He felt gratitude not just for the recognition, but for the journey that had brought him here. He had proven to himself more than anyone else that his dreams were valid. As the conversation continued, he noticed the change in the room's energy. Those who had judged him, the whispers, the sneers, they had all vanished. In their place was curiosity, respect, and admiration. The lesson was clear. Talent and perseverance could not be hidden by outward appearances. The music, and the story behind it, had spoken louder than judgment ever could. Later, as he stepped out into the cool evening air, he allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply. The city lights reflected off the streets, but they no longer seemed intimidating. They felt inviting, like a stage waiting for him to step onto it, to continue his journey. He walked slowly, savoring the feeling of accomplishment and anticipation. The path ahead was still long, filled with challenges and opportunities, but he now knew that he had what it took to face it. His music, his dedication, and his belief in himself had brought him this far, and they would carry him further still. For the first time in a long while, he allowed a small smile to cross his face. Not a boastful smile, not one seeking approval, but a quiet, confident smile that came from knowing he had remained true to himself, his passion, and his dream. The world had judged him by his clothes, but it could no longer ignore the music that defined him. The days that followed were a whirlwind of new experiences, each one a mix of excitement, anxiety, and wonder. He had been invited to join the music academy, a place that once seemed distant and unreachable. Walking through its grand halls now felt both surreal and exhilarating. The polished floors gleamed under his feet, and the walls, lined with portraits of legendary musicians, seemed to silently encourage him. Every corner of the building whispered stories of talent, dedication, and the pursuit of excellence. Yet, despite the grandeur, he felt a quiet determination within himself. He had earned a place here, not through appearances or connections, but through sheer passion, hard work, and the music that had always lived inside him. On his first day of formal training, he entered the practice rooms, which were filled with the sound of scales, arpeggios, and pieces of all kinds. Some students were polite, some curious, while a few could not hide their skepticism. They looked at his worn clothes, his simple bag, and the way he carried himself with quiet humility. Whispers followed him, just as they always had, but he walked past them, focusing on the piano that awaited him. The instrument, a grand and perfectly tuned piano, felt like an old friend. He took a deep breath, seated himself, and began to play softly. The notes filled the room, not just with sound, but with the emotions and stories of years spent alone with music. The teachers, experienced and discerning, observed him with careful eyes. They asked questions about his technique, his understanding of music theory, and his experiences with performance. He answered honestly, revealing the self-taught methods he had developed over the years. At first, some of them raised eyebrows, surprised that such skill could come without formal guidance. But as they listened, their expressions shifted from doubt to admiration. One of them, a pianist with decades of experience, even nodded quietly, acknowledging the talent that had been nurtured through determination rather than privilege. Despite the recognition, he felt the weight of responsibility. Every lesson, every practice session, became a test not only of his skill but also of his ability to adapt and grow. He was no longer performing in empty rooms or on old pianos with uneven keys. Now, he was surrounded by peers who had access to the best instruments, instruction, and resources. It was intimidating, and sometimes, the confidence he had relied on seemed fragile in the face of so many polished performers. But he reminded himself that he had faced challenges before, and every struggle had made him stronger. He would learn, he would adapt, and he would continue to let the music speak. Outside the practice rooms, the academy was a bustling community. Students exchanged stories, compared experiences, and shared tips on technique and theory. Many of them came from families that had supported their training for years, providing lessons, instruments, and encouragement. They often glanced at him with curiosity, wondering how someone so modestly dressed could hold their own among the best. Some approached cautiously, asking about his methods, his favorite composers, and the hours he had spent learning. He answered simply, sometimes with stories about practicing late at night on borrowed pianos or teaching himself from old books. These stories, though ordinary to him, seemed extraordinary to those who had always had everything handed to them. As the weeks passed, he began to notice changes not just in how others saw him but in how he saw himself. Each challenge became an opportunity to refine his technique, to explore new styles, and to deepen his understanding of music. He discovered nuances in rhythm, dynamics, and expression that he had only glimpsed before. The guidance from his teachers, combined with his own intuition and creativity, allowed him to grow rapidly. Even in moments of self-doubt, He reminded himself of the long journey that had brought him here, of the countless nights spent alone with a piano, of the sacrifices made for the sake of a dream. Those memories gave him strength, grounding him in the knowledge that his passion could overcome any obstacle. One afternoon, a senior student approached him with a polite, almost hesitant expression. "I heard your performance the other day," she said. "It was incredible. I've never seen someone play with so much feeling. Can you teach me how you do it?" He smiled, humbled by the request. "I don't know if I can teach it," he replied softly. "It's not really about technique alone. It's about listening, feeling, and letting the music come through you. It takes time, patience, and practice." She nodded, clearly impressed, and they spent some time together exploring scales and simple pieces. The moment reinforced a lesson he had learned long ago. Talent was not just about skill, but about sharing, inspiring, and connecting with others through music. Despite these small victories, he still faced judgment from some peers. A few students whispered behind his back, questioning how someone with no formal background could compete on the same level as them. They compared his appearance to their polished uniforms and expensive instruments, unable to see beyond the surface. It stung at first, but he reminded himself that music was louder than words, and talent would always reveal itself. Instead of responding to criticism, he let his performances speak. Every note he played was a quiet answer to their doubts, a demonstration that dedication and passion could not be measured by outward appearances. He also faced new challenges in adapting to the Academy's rigorous schedule. Long practice hours, theory classes, and performance preparations pushed him to his limits. There were days when his fingers ached, when he struggled to master complex pieces, or when fatigue threatened to dampen his focus. Yet, he embraced these challenges, viewing them as opportunities to grow. Every mistake became a lesson, every difficult passage an invitation to learn. His resilience, honed through years of solitary practice and self-teaching, proved invaluable. He had learned that true progress came not from ease or comfort, but from facing difficulties head-on and persevering through them. One evening, after a particularly grueling practice session, he walked through the quiet halls of the Academy. The sun had set, and the building was illuminated by soft lights that reflected off the polished floors. He paused by a window, looking out at the city below. The streets were alive with people, but he felt a sense of peace that he had never experienced before. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibilities ahead. Scholarships, performances, perhaps even recognition beyond the Academy. These were no longer distant dreams, but potential realities. Yet, he reminded himself that success was not the ultimate goal. Music itself, the act of creating and sharing it, remained at the center of everything he did. A few weeks later, he was asked to perform in a small recital organized by the Academy. It was not a major concert, but it would give him a chance to showcase his growth and development to both teachers and peers. He spent hours preparing, carefully selecting pieces that highlighted both technical skill and emotional depth. On the day of the recital, he arrived early, practicing quietly in an empty room while others set up chairs and instruments. He felt a familiar nervousness, but it was tempered by confidence in his abilities and preparation. He had faced pressure before, and he had always risen to the occasion. When it was his turn to play, he walked onto the small stage, greeted by polite applause. He seated himself at the piano and allowed the music to flow naturally. Every note resonated with the hours of practice, the struggles of the past, and the joy of finally being able to express himself fully. The audience, including his teachers and fellow students, listened intently. Some leaned forward, captivated by the emotion in his playing, while others exchanged glances of quiet astonishment. The performance was more than just skill. It was storytelling, a journey through the highs and lows of his life, communicated entirely through the piano. After the recital, several students approached him, expressing admiration and curiosity. "I had no idea you had studied like that on your own," one said. Another remarked, "Your emotion is incredible. It feels like you're telling a story with every note." He smiled and thanked them, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Recognition was rewarding, but the deeper joy came from connecting with others through music, from showing them what dedication and passion could achieve, even without privilege or resources. That evening, as he walked home through the quiet streets, he reflected on the journey so far. The academy had opened doors, yes, but it had also revealed the work and persistence required to grow as a musician. He knew that more challenges lay ahead, more performances, more opportunities to prove himself. But he no longer feared judgment or doubt. He had learned that skill and passion, coupled with perseverance, could overcome the limitations imposed by appearance or circumstance. The music inside him was stronger than any external barrier. In the weeks that followed, he continued to practice, perform, and learn. Each day brought new lessons, not just about technique or theory, but about life, patience, and resilience. He formed friendships with other students, shared his experiences, and quietly inspired those who had once doubted him. He became a living reminder that talent is not defined by appearance, background, or resources, but by dedication, heart, and the courage to keep moving forward. By the end of the term, he had earned not only the respect of his teachers and peers but also a quiet confidence in himself that went beyond recognition. He knew that the journey would not be easy, that more challenges and opportunities awaited, but he was ready. He had faced doubt, struggle, and judgment before, and he had always emerged stronger. Now, with the academy behind him and his music as his guide, he was prepared to take the next step, to explore new horizons, and to continue proving, quietly and profoundly, that the music he carried could touch hearts, transcend appearances, and change the lives of those who listened. Months passed, and the young pianist's life at the academy had become a rhythm of practice, study, and small performances. Each day brought him closer to mastery, yet the journey was never easy. The hours were long, the expectations high, and the challenge of keeping up with peers who had grown up with every opportunity weighed heavily. Still, he moved forward with quiet determination, always letting the music guide him, always remembering why he had begun this journey in the first place. The world outside could judge appearances, but inside the practice rooms, talent and passion were the only measures that mattered. One day, the academy announced a special recital, a showcase for talented students, to be attended by respected musicians, critics, and a small audience of invited guests. It was an opportunity that could change a musician's path forever. When he heard the news, his heart raced. He knew this performance could open doors he had only dreamed of before. Yet, he also felt the familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. This was not just a casual recital. It was a chance to step into the world beyond the academy, to show everyone, not just the teachers or his peers, what he could do. In the days leading up to the recital, he immersed himself in preparation. He selected pieces that would display both technical skill and emotional depth, pieces that told a story through their melodies and harmonies. He practiced for hours each day, perfecting every note, every pause, every expression. Sometimes he felt exhausted, his fingers sore from constant repetition, his mind weary from focus. But in those moments, he reminded himself of the journey he had already traveled. From small, out-of-tune pianos in quiet rooms to grand instruments that resonated with his passion. Every challenge he had faced before now gave him strength to face this one. On the night of the recital, he arrived early, taking a moment to breathe in the atmosphere. The hall was grand, filled with polished wooden floors, shining chandeliers, and rows of seats waiting to be filled. People began to arrive, dressed elegantly, their eyes scanning the room with curiosity and anticipation. Some glanced toward him as he entered, noting his simple clothes, his modest bag, and the quiet confidence in his posture. Whispers followed, as they always did, questioning who this young man was, why he was here, and what he could possibly offer. He ignored them, focusing instead on the piano waiting on stage, his companion and the medium through which he would speak. When his turn came, he walked to the stage, each step measured and calm. He seated himself at the grand piano, took a deep breath, and let his hands hover over the keys. The audience settled into silence, their whispers fading as the first notes filled the air. The sound was soft at first, delicate, yet full of presence. Slowly, the music built, each chord telling a story of struggle, perseverance, and hope. The hall seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the depth of emotion that emanated from the piano. As he played, the expressions in the audience shifted. Those who had glanced skeptically at his clothes and bag now leaned forward, their eyes wide in astonishment. They could not deny the skill, the heart, and the artistry that flowed from his fingers. The critics, seated in the front row with pens poised, found themselves writing furiously, trying to capture the brilliance unfolding before them. Even the well-dressed, confident students who had once doubted him could not hide their amazement. Every note he played erased the judgments of the past, leaving only the undeniable truth of his talent. The performance was not just technical, it was storytelling. He poured every experience, every hardship, every quiet victory into the music. The melodies spoke of late nights spent practicing in silence, of small victories when a difficult piece finally came together, of the perseverance required to overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. The audience felt it whether they understood the story behind it or not. Music has a way of speaking directly to the heart, and that night it spoke loudly and clearly. When the final note resonated through the hall and faded into silence, there was a moment where no one moved. The audience, stunned and breathless, sat in awe. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room, soft at first, then growing louder and stronger. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. The judges, critics, and teachers exchanged glances of astonishment, finally recognizing what they had suspected but could hardly believe. A young pianist with humble beginnings had delivered a performance of rare and profound beauty. After the recital, people approached him, eager to know more. Critics asked about his background, musicians inquired about his methods, and fellow students congratulated him with genuine admiration. For the first time, he experienced recognition not filtered through skepticism or judgment. People were seeing him for who he truly was, not defined by his clothes, not by the modest bag he carried, but by the genius and heart that had been cultivated through years of dedication. Among the visitors was a renowned pianist, someone he had admired from afar for years. The pianist extended a hand, his eyes full of respect. "Your performance was extraordinary," he said. "You have something rare, something that cannot be taught, an ability to make the music speak in a way that touches the soul. Have you considered performing professionally?" The young man nodded, feeling a mix of humility and pride. The question was more than an opportunity. It was validation of a lifetime of struggle, of every lonely night spent learning and practicing, of every obstacle overcome. As word of his performance spread, invitations followed. Local concerts, small festivals, and even some larger venues sought to feature him. The shy, unassuming young man who had once walked past judgmental eyes and whispers now found himself in a position where people listened attentively to his every word and awaited his next performance. Yet he remained grounded. Recognition was gratifying, but the true reward was the music itself, the ability to create, to express, and to touch hearts. He also took time to mentor other students, especially those who were overlooked or underestimated. He remembered how it felt to be judged by appearances, to have potential doubted simply because of clothing or background. He shared not only techniques but encouragement, teaching them that talent comes in many forms and that perseverance can overcome the most unlikely obstacles. In doing so, he became a symbol of hope and inspiration, quietly changing the culture of the academy one student at a time. Despite all the attention, he remained humble. Fame had not changed him. He still walked through the streets in simple clothes, still carried his modest bag, still valued the quiet moments of practice above applause. The recognition had brought new opportunities, but it had not altered the essence of who he was. His music, and the dedication that fueled it, remained at the center of his life. The world could celebrate his talent, but the personal joy he found in playing and creating was his alone. One afternoon, after a particularly successful performance at a local festival, he sat alone at a piano in a quiet room. The applause still echoed faintly in his mind, the kind words of critics and admirers lingering like a soft melody. He began to play, not for an audience, not for recognition, but for himself. The music flowed effortlessly, each note a reflection of his journey, his struggles, and his triumphs. In that moment, he realized that while recognition was rewarding, the true magic of music lay in its ability to express what words could not. It was a gift, a companion, and a voice for the heart. The reactions of those who had once doubted him were never far from his mind. He thought of the people who had whispered, who had sneered, who had judged him by his clothes. He did not feel anger, only a quiet sense of satisfaction. They had been mistaken, not maliciously, but because appearances are often misleading. His talent, his heart, and his dedication had revealed the truth. And more importantly, he had proved to himself that he could rise above judgment, that he could follow his passion, and that he could touch the hearts of others with the music that lived within him. The night drew on, and he closed the piano lid gently. He leaned back in his chair, a soft smile on his face. The journey was far from over. More performances, more challenges, and more opportunities awaited. But he knew that he had crossed a threshold. The world had seen his talent, the whispers of doubt had faded, and the music that had always defined him now had a place to shine. He had been judged by appearances, underestimated by those who could not see the truth, yet he had triumphed, not with arrogance, but with humility and passion. As he left the room and walked into the quiet night, the city lights reflected off the streets, shimmering like the notes he had played that evening. The applause, the admiration, and the recognition were all gifts, but they were secondary to the journey itself. He had followed his passion through hardship and doubt, and in doing so, he had discovered not only his own strength but the power of music to reveal truth, touch souls, and change the hearts of those who listened. That night, he understood that his story was only beginning. The piano had been his teacher, his companion, and his voice. Now it would also be his bridge to the wider world, allowing him to inspire, connect, and bring hope to countless others. And in the quiet moments, when the hall was empty and the streets were still, he would continue to play, not for fame, not for applause, but for the love of music itself. A love that had carried him through everything, and that would continue to guide him always. Time moved quickly, but the young pianist seemed to move even faster, propelled by a combination of talent, dedication, and the hunger to share his music with the world. The academy had become more than a place of learning. It was a home for his passion, a space where his skills could grow, and where he could finally be seen for what he truly was. He had performed countless times, each concert, recital, and small gathering helping him gain confidence, experience, and a growing reputation. The whispers and judgments from his past seemed like distant echoes, unable to touch the person he had become. Opportunities began to appear, one after another. Invitations to play at festivals, to perform with orchestras, and even to record in professional studios arrived unexpectedly but naturally. Each offer carried with it a challenge and a promise. The chance to reach wider audiences, to test his abilities, and to show the world the depth of his talent. At first, he approached these opportunities cautiously. He remembered the days of struggle, the nights when every note was a battle, and the lessons learned in humility. But he knew that the time had come to step forward, to embrace the path that his hard work and dedication had earned him. His first major public performance outside the academy was in a small concert hall in the city. The hall was packed with music lovers, critics, and people curious about the young pianist who had been quietly making a name for himself. He arrived early, setting up in a quiet corner to practice, letting his fingers move over the keys as he adjusted to the instrument. He felt the familiar mix of excitement and nerves, but it was different now. He had faced pressure before, had performed for audiences that doubted him, and had always let his music speak. This time, the anticipation was tempered by a quiet confidence, a knowledge that he was ready to share his gift. When the concert began, he stepped onto the stage to polite applause. He took a deep breath and seated himself at the piano, letting his hands hover for a moment, feeling the smooth surface of the keys. Then he began to play. The notes flowed effortlessly, full of emotion and precision. The music carried the story of his life. The struggles, the long nights of practice, the quiet triumphs, and the joy of finally being understood. The audience was captivated. Some leaned forward in their seats. Some closed their eyes to let the music fill their hearts. And some whispered to one another in awe. This performance marked a turning point. Word of his talent spread quickly, reaching musicians, critics, and audiences in nearby cities. He received letters, emails, and invitations, all praising his ability to bring music to life in a way that felt both personal and universal. But with recognition came new challenges. He was now expected to perform regularly, to maintain a level of excellence that could intimidate even seasoned musicians. There were moments of doubt, nights when exhaustion made his fingers ache and his mind heavy. Yet, he faced each challenge with determination, remembering the journey that had brought him here and the music that had always been his guiding light. As his reputation grew, so did the opportunities to collaborate with others. He began working with orchestras, other talented musicians, and composers who wanted to hear his interpretations and contributions. He discovered new dimensions of music, learning to adapt, to listen, and to create harmony not just in notes but in collaboration. Each experience broadened his understanding, deepened his skill, and reinforced the lesson he had learned long ago. That music was not about appearances or status, but about connection, emotion, and the courage to express oneself fully. Alongside his professional growth, he never forgot the struggles that had shaped him. He often returned to the academy to mentor younger students, especially those overlooked or underestimated. He shared not only his technical knowledge but also his journey, encouraging them to persevere despite difficulties. He remembered how it felt to be judged for something as trivial as clothing, and he made it a point to remind others that talent and dedication matter far more than appearances. His story became a beacon of hope, showing that obstacles could be overcome and that passion could transform a life. One day, he was invited to perform at a large national music festival. The stage was massive, the audience vast, and the expectations high. As he prepared backstage, he felt a rush of memories. The early mornings, the long walks to practice, the nights spent alone with a piano in a quiet room. He felt a moment of nervousness but quickly replaced it with focus. He remembered what had brought him here. Not fame, not recognition, but the music itself. When he stepped onto the stage, he carried that understanding with him, letting it guide every movement, every note. The performance was electrifying. The music rose and fell, carrying the audience through a journey of emotion and mastery. He played with a confidence born of years of practice, a skill tempered by humility, and a passion that could not be ignored. People were moved to tears, to applause, to standing ovations. Critics praised his ability to combine technical skill with profound emotion, calling his performance one of the most memorable of the festival. For the first time, he felt that the world had truly seen him. Not the clothes he wore, not the bag he carried, but the heart and genius that lived in his music. Despite the acclaim, he remained grounded. Recognition was gratifying, but it did not define him. He continued to practice in quiet rooms, to perform for audiences both large and small, and to mentor those who needed encouragement. He found joy in every note played, every story told through music, and every connection made with others who felt the emotions he conveyed. His life had transformed, but the essence of who he was, the love of music, the drive to improve, and the desire to inspire, remained unchanged. Over time, he began to compose his own pieces. Drawing from his experiences, from the struggles and victories of his life, he created music that spoke directly to the heart. These compositions were performed in concerts, recorded for listeners, and studied by students eager to understand the depth of feeling within each note. He had moved from being a hidden talent to a creator, someone whose music not only impressed technically, but also resonated deeply with those who heard it. His story inspired countless others. Young musicians, especially those from humble backgrounds, looked to him as proof that talent and perseverance could overcome obstacles. He gave interviews, shared his journey, and emphasized the importance of dedication, resilience, and authenticity. Yet, he always returned to the piano, reminding himself and others that the music itself was the most important reward. Recognition and success were secondary to the joy of creation and the impact that music could have on people's hearts. Years later, he performed in some of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. Audiences filled the seats, some coming specifically to hear the pianist who had once been judged for his clothes, but now played with brilliance and soul unmatched by many. He never forgot the early days, the small pianos, the long walks, the quiet nights of practice. They remained a part of him, grounding him in humility and gratitude. Every performance was both a triumph and a reminder of the journey that had brought him to this point. Even with all the acclaim, he remained approachable, kind, and focused on the art itself. He continued to mentor students, collaborate with other musicians, and create music that touched lives. The lessons he had learned about perseverance, humility, and the importance of inner talent over outward appearances were now shared widely, shaping a new generation of musicians who carried his story as both inspiration and guidance. He had been judged, underestimated, and overlooked in the past, but he had transformed that judgment into motivation. He had taken every doubt and every whisper of skepticism and allowed it to fuel his growth. His journey was proof that talent, when nurtured with dedication and heart, could not be ignored. Appearances could deceive, and judgments could be wrong, but passion, perseverance, and authenticity would always shine through. On a quiet evening, after a long day of rehearsals and mentoring, he sat at a piano in his small, cozy apartment. The city outside was alive with lights and sounds, but inside, the room was filled only with music. He played softly, letting each note carry the stories of his life, the struggles, the victories, the people who had doubted him, and the moments of triumph. It was a moment of reflection, of peace, and of gratitude. He had achieved more than he had ever imagined, yet he remained devoted to the path of music, knowing that the journey itself was the greatest reward. Looking back, he realized that the most important moments had not been the applause or recognition, but the quiet victories. Mastering a difficult piece, connecting with an audience, mentoring a struggling student, and staying true to himself despite the judgments of the world. He understood that success was not measured solely by fame or wealth, but by the ability to inspire, to create, and to remain authentic in a world that often values appearances over substance. He had come a long way from the young man walking down crowded streets in worn clothes, carrying a small bag filled with dreams. That boy had faced judgment, doubt, and hardship, yet he had never stopped believing in himself. Today, he was recognized as a pianist of extraordinary talent, admired by audiences and critics alike. Yet, he remained humble, grounded, and committed to the music that had always been his guide. The story of the pianist spread far and wide, not just for his remarkable performances, but for the journey he had undertaken. He became an inspiration, a reminder that appearances are deceptive, that talent and passion are what truly matter, and that perseverance can overcome even the most daunting obstacles. His life became a testament to the power of dedication, resilience, and authenticity, showing the world that the heart of a true artist lies not in clothes or status, but in the music they create and the lives they touch. And so, he continued to play, to create, to inspire, and to remind everyone that judgment based on appearances is always shallow, and that true genius often lives quietly, waiting for the right moment to be heard. His music became his legacy, his journey a story of hope, and his life a shining example of what is possible when talent is paired with unwavering dedication and a heart devoted to the art of expression.